reading some things, so I won't be able to see myself. So hopefully, maybe someone can talk at me if you can interrupt me. So my name is Sarah, and I'm first off just going to do a land acknowledgement. So I'm currently residing in Guelph, which is Acknowledgement territory, and so I'm speaking from that physical location, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I'd like to acknowledge the Acknowledgement peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands of the Guelph area, and offer respect to our Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Métis neighbors. We honor and respect their ongoing cultural and spiritual connections to this country. We aim to respect cultural heritage, customs, and beliefs of all Indigenous people. We also recognize the past and current violence that's taken place on Indigenous lands against Indigenous people. We aim in all aspects of our work to be conscious of, sensitive towards, and fight for change regarding these violences. So I know that folks are all over the world right now listening, and in lots of different territories. There's lots of different treaties that are impacting those areas. There's lots of unceded people. There's lots of colonization taking place in different ways in different communities. So I think it's important that we take time when we're talking about speciesism, when we're talking about patriarchy and misogyny, to think about how those things are playing out in our communities and what they look like in different communities. So my first question is for everyone is, how are you connected to the land where you live? And when I say that, I mean, where you live currently. Are you a settler? Are you Indigenous? Are you Indigenous to another territory? So just take a second to think about that. And when you think about that, it's important to start doing that research. So looking into, what are the treaties that impact that area, particularly in Turtle Island. We're all treaty. If you're a settler or Indigenous, we're all impacted by them. Learning about them is really important. Learning about how, the government is currently breaking them is really important to do proper solidarity and allyship. Another thing to think about is where you're connected to land where you were from or where you were raised. So that's the same thing. Were you a settler, or Indigenous, or Indigenous to another territory? And then being more proactive, who in the area that you're currently existing in is poverty? And can you create a list of those groups of people in your head? And if you can't, or not a very long list, then maybe that means you need to do some work to research those things and get more information. Another question also is, who in the area you're in right now is currently doing settler accountability work? And once again, if you can't think of a list of groups doing that work, it's really important in this field and in the work of doing trying to end misogyny and try and talk about how misogyny and patriarchy intersect with speciesism. These things are deeply interconnected with conversations of colonization. And as a settler person, it's a part of my responsibility to constantly include these conversations and work constantly in solidarity with the Indigenous community. Particularly when we're talking about violence against women and patriarchy, we can see the impact in particular on Indigenous women. There's over 800 missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and obviously these things pretty much go unnoticed. These cries are being ignored, and so this should be our priority right now. And when we talk about talking about connecting speciesism and patriarchy, that's where we really need to be focusing a lot of our energy. I know there's going to be really great speakers who's going to talk a lot about that later. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about trauma, because we're going to be talking about really heavy things today. So just a reminder that trauma, violence, and pain happens in lots of different kinds of ways. We really want people to be aware that there's potential issues of animal abuse, racism, colonialism, homophobia, sexual violence, and misogyny going to be discussed today over the course of the day, as well as there's going to be images that could be depictions of sexual violence, of misogyny, of objectification of women's bodies or other folks' bodies, and that's really real, so be aware of that, be conscious of that. We encourage folks to trust their own reactions and feelings and to do what we all need to take care of ourselves and to each other. This could mean taking a break over certain points of the day and, taking a breather, going for a walk, having some tea, or it could mean that you can't finish with the rest of today's conference. And as long as you are aware of what your needs and boundaries are, that's what's most important. Remembering that many of us enter social justice work as survivors, and it's really important to the movement that we recognize that that self and community care is really valuable. Audre Lorde states that caring for myself is not self-indulgent, it is self-preservation and is an act of political warfare. I think it's really important to ground our work, particularly these kinds of conversations, in that knowledge. I really believe that the system of oppression thrives on our denial of our needs, particularly related to self and community care. And so I've also been asked to talk about boundaries and ground rules, the most exciting things ever. These are kind of some things that I work with when I talk about creating spaces. When we try to intentionally construct spaces, it's kind of a tricky and bizarre thing, because the notion of trying to create safe space where everyone is welcome does not do us any justice. The folks who usually have the privilege of defining these spaces are not the people who are most in need of it. So let's instead move towards the idea of building accountable spaces. To build better spaces, we need to be more accountable to each other. So some of the ways that this can happen, so I know that most folks are on mute, and there's going to be speakers who are super great, but there's going to be ways that we interact with each other on the side in a little speaker typey thing. That's of course, the professional word for it. And then Mike at some points will be unmuting people so they can ask questions. So there's lots of ways and moments where we can be more accountable to each other in those kinds of interactions. So for me, some of the ways that this can happen is remembering that we all cause and are all survivors of harm. So that means that coming from a place that we're not attacking each other, and remembering that people experience or experiencing and causing harm in lots of different kinds of ways. Remembering also that community accountability is not about policing the actions of others. Also remembering that this space is for listening and opening up ourselves to new ideas, not about forcing beliefs onto folks. One that I think is really important, particularly as someone who holds a lot of privilege, that when folks give me feedback on offensive behaviors or comments, it's our responsibility to listen, to really listen, to apologize, and to work to change that. So if a comment's made and someone calls someone in or calls someone out, being really present and listening and responding to that. Something else I think is really important is leaning into our discomfort. That's really hard work, but really valuable in this movement. It's how we're going to move forward. I also think that forgiveness is really radical, and so grounding ourselves in that, so forgiving other people and forgiving ourselves as well. And something that I think is always really important in these spaces is think about your privilege and how much space you take up in life, and particularly in these conversations, and maybe speak up and, oh my gosh, I just forgot the term for it. But basically be aware that if you typically take up a lot of space, maybe do more time listening this time. Another thing that's really great is listen to what you need, and if it's relevant, ask for it. I think this is not a comprehensive list, but it's somewhere to start. Folks are obviously welcome to use any of those in the future. And if you have more things you'd like to add in, you could probably type in a little thing on the side and we can take that into conversation. So yeah, so if there are other ground rules that you'd like to see people, there are other suggestions, obviously we're really open to that. And the final one, which I find really, really important, and I think we don't talk about enough in certain communities, is that we live in a police state, and the criminalization of dissent is a very real thing. Basically, I'm saying don't indict yourself. The things you're saying here are being recorded by people who are really loving and full of care, but those recordings could be used by other people. Don't say things that potentially could get you in trouble later with the law, unless that's cool with you and that's what you want. But just be aware that, your words have impact, and if they're being recorded, and these could be used to get you in trouble. I think that's all I have to say, Mike. Is there anything else?
No, that's great. Good job.
Thanks.